Right? Even the speed still. It's kind of like a reunion. You got someone in your Yes. Hi, my name is Alice Furi. I'm the president of the National Interest Foundation. I'd like to welcome you all for being with us. And we have a very special guest and we have a very special audience. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge an old-time friend and appreciate his being here, David Keane. David, for of you who don't know him or you know him, he was the head of the NRA nationwide. He was the head of the American Conservative for almost 20 years. And I know he's semi-retired, and he made his time to be here with us. And thank you very much for being with us. Many special people are here too. Bruce Fein just said that this looks like a high school reunion. Many old friends here.
Yeah, but not quite. Yeah, this is too damn old.
Anyway, we'll just tell you the rules. Bruce Fein will be moderating this lunch. And we'll turn it to Mr. Hagel. So any questions, please do not give us a lecture. Just be short, to the point, 2-3 minutes to allow others to ask more questions. Allow everyone here if they have. So please be short and to the point. And now I'd like to welcome Bruce Fein, the moderator, and Mr. Chuck Hagel. Everyone knows who he was. He was in the Senate for 24 years.
Well, I wouldn't look this good if it was. Not that I look good, but 12 years. 12 years.
And was Secretary of Defense for President Obama. And also, I think many of you have questions about that period. There are lots of things took place, especially in the Middle East during that period, but also other parts of the world. I'll turn the microphone to Bruce.
Well, thank you, Khalid, and thanks everyone for appearing today. Our special guest, and why you're here, is Senator Hagel. So I'll make sure that he speaks and is able to engage your questions. So the way we'll do this in terms of format is we'll make a short opening statement. I think Khalid and I will open with a few questions, and then we'll hand it over to the audience. And probably the best way to do this is hold your hand up, and I will try to acknowledge everybody and stay around long enough so everyone's questions are answered. So, Senator Hagel, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bruce. And is that on or? Thank you. Good to see you again, too. I haven't seen Bruce in a long time, like many of you. Sir, always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you. And all of you, thank you for coming. Good to see so many of you. So many of you I haven't seen. David Keane, I haven't seen in many years. Almost everybody sitting around this table I've known or I owe money to. Or I have some connection with Dr. Rivka. My wife and I have known Dr. Rivka for over 30 years. And it's good to see him. And Bassam Aberdeen I've known since the 80s. It's reassuring to see people that you have known over the years, that you have confidence in, that you admire and you like, gathered again just to remind us all that the world has not completely gone to hell, that there are still not only wise people, but good people who care about mankind and care about the world, as you have all been part of that and has guided you for your careers, which I've always admired that about all the people I know around this table. I know questions are the real issue here, so I will be brief. I know when a former United States Senator says, I'll be brief, that could go for hours, but I'll try and control the bad habits I picked up in that institution. I don't need to remind any of you here the kind of trouble the world is in. I think the world is more dangerous, more unstable than any time since World War II. There's not any part of the world that is really stable or secure. That's because of many reasons and pressures and forces, as you all know. But what's primarily troubling to me, and this applies first to this country, the United States of America, is that we're off balance, terribly off balance in this country. And one of the prime reasons for that, in my opinion, is that this country has lost confidence and trust in its institutions. Gallup does a poll every year, has been doing it for 17 years, taking a poll on the 15 most important institutions in America: our judicial system, our media, education, organized religion, obviously politics, government, military, big business, small business. And over the years, only the military has been over 50% of confidence and trust in the American people of that institution, the military. The military the last few years has been in the low 70s. This year's small business broke 50% confidence and trust in American people. Every other institution is in the 30s, 20s, some in the teens, and of course, Congress in politics are in single digits. And I don't have to remind you why that's the case, but society loses confidence and trust in its most important and managing institutions, ones that knit a society together. We're in trouble. And the rest of the world sees this. Over the years, the last few years, I have had so many ambassadors come to me and ask me, ambassadors from all over the world, ambassadors from countries where the United States has very close relationships. What has happened to America? Obviously, the January 6th incident not only rocked this country, but it rocked the world. I mean, how could this happen in the United States? So I start with that point because still, after 75 years, the United States is the most secure, steady, obviously large, economically, militarily, diplomatically country in the world. And you all know so well, many of you far better than I, how important the United States is to the rest of the world, especially our allies, because what happens, as you know, and I've been told this many times, we can't count on the United States. We're uncertain about where the United States is going, and we're going to have to make some adjustments in our relationships. We're going to have to adapt, and you all know what that means. That means China. That means other things going on. So there's then no real guiding principles of governance. It's all about adaptation and adjustment, and I understand that. I'm not critical of that. I understand that. But that's what we are losing, as well as so many other dynamics of world leadership, where the United States has been counted on. Not that we haven't made mistakes. We sure as hell have made a lot of mistakes. But I will end with this, and then we'll talk about anything you want to talk about. Somebody asked me the other day, I think it was at a University of Chicago. I was out there. I do a lot of work with them. I do a lot of work with universities. And a young doctoral student asked me about the United States and the mistakes that we had made. And I said, well, yes, we have made a lot of mistakes. We have 27 amendments to the Constitution, or our Constitution, because we didn't get it all right the first time. And we're still working on it. But what the United States does have is the capability to self-correct. We don't have to go through revolutions. We don't have to hang people. We don't have to shoot people. We can adjust and we can self-correct because we have a constitution that allows us to do it. We have a system, a structure. And we've got an attitude that has been brought forward for 250 years because of the different people that assimilated into this country. Which I don't think you can overstate how important that is. All the different religions, the different people, and we're still doing that, which makes us better, which makes us more aware. And then the last point I made to the student was, with all the problems U.S. has had and mistakes that we've made in 250 years, I challenge you to find one country in the history of the world who has been more judicious and more generous with its power than the United States has been with her power. Again, meaning that we're far from perfect. But when you lose that component of world affairs and that centralization, you lose a lot more than the obvious. And that's what I say concerns me more than anything else going on. And there are a lot of reasons for concern. Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East, North Korea, I mean just go right through the inventory. But if we come apart here in this country, not only are we in a lot of trouble, but the world will be in a lot of trouble. Because if the United States is displaced, replaced as the world leader, then something will fill that vacuum. And it'll be either chaos or China attempting to do it. It won't be good for anybody. So I do leave you with this. I'm still optimistic. I'm a realist, very much a realist about everything. I've just seen too much of the world, as you all have. And all the jobs I've had in my life, private sector, public sector, and I've had a lot of them, it leads me to still believe, because I deal with a lot of young people. I deal with a lot of young members of Congress, and that's the future. But the future of any generation, of any country, has always been young people. Young people have made the difference. I think about my time in Vietnam in 1968. It was the young people who forced us out. And it's the young people because they know the difference between right and wrong. They still have a purity to them. And as we all get older and we take on more responsibilities and more jobs and marriage and all the responsibilities that come with age, we tend to compromise a little here, a little here, a little here. And that's the world. That's reality. Young people don't. I mean, there's a downside to that too. But we got to listen to young people. And that's why I'm still optimistic about the world and about this country, because of our young people and the young people around the world. So I will, if I've not confused you completely, then let's talk about whatever you want to talk.
All right. Thank you, Senator Hagel. You had questions
Yes,
first.
some kind of thank you for this insightful presentation. My question is about a very fresh event that took place yesterday. OPEC decided yesterday to cut production by 2 million barrels, which is in coordination with the Russians. And I think part of it is a snub to President Biden, which shows very little respect since he been lobbying OPEC and the Saudis to cut production, to increase production and keep the price around $80. There are reports that he even promised to buy a large sum of oil for $80 a barrel, promised the Saudis that. What do you think should happen? How the U.S. should react? How the president should react to this?
Well, I don't know the inside thinking of the Biden administration. I mean, I stay in touch with Blinken and Lloyd Austin and a lot of the cabinet and people at the White House, but I don't really know all that's going on. And I'm certainly not an expert on anything, starting with the Middle East. But let's go back a few years and take a look at the relationship with Saudi Arabia and the United States. Obviously, the Khashoggi thing exploded everywhere, and that has never been really dealt with. I mean, the Saudis have covered that up, and you know the story. The United States diplomatically has tried to work around that, but it won't go away. And that one issue, but it was building, has really caused a lot of damage. And I think I've met MBS a couple of times when he would sit behind his father. When I would meet with his father. His father was, among other things, Minister of Defense. But I really don't know him. But I know people who do know him very well. It's my opinion that he's a dangerous guy. He has made changes in Saudi Arabia that are kind of glittery to the public. But what he's doing in the background, locking up women, other issues that are far worse, is still there. And he probably is running Saudi Arabia in many ways more dictatorial than his father or grandfather. So when you've got a leader like that, you've got a problem dealing with him. Saudi Arabia is an important country for obvious reasons. We still have to deal with Saudi Arabia. We can't just walk away and say, well, call us when you get rid of MBS or whatever issues that we have. So you have to, this is diplomacy. This is the imperfection of diplomacy. There's never a good answer to almost any of these issues. So how do you deal with them? And especially on the issues you ask me on oil. I think the government, our government, Biden administration, was surprised by this decision. I think they were very surprised. And it appears on the outside that MBS not only snubbed Biden, but said kind of publicly, leading this charge, screw you. I haven't talked to anybody in the administration since this happened, but my guess is that, as I said, they were rocked by this, and they're going to have to continue to deal with it. Now, UAE, Kuwait, taking a little different approach. Other OPEC nations, I think, will. But what this also does is send a message that we're siding with Russia. Because when you dig down into this, not very deeply, this helps Russia and keeps the Russian oil flowing and the prices up. And that's also an aspect, a consequence of this that's being viewed by this administration, I'm sure, and the world. So, I mean, you can't just shut yourself away. You got to deal with it. We're going into a very difficult time here. Here this winter. Obviously, what's going to happen in Europe with fuel, specifically, what most likely the Russians did in the Baltic with the Nord Stream attacks. Other more subtle but specific areas of making it very difficult for the West. And again, this appears to the West and in other parts of the world that OPEC Plus did was kind of to screw the West and screw the United States. That's a very dangerous thing because that leads to a lot of consequences if it's not handled right. And there's so much that diplomatically that we're handling, the world is handling, is like nitroglycerin. I mean, it could blow up any time. And the wrong moves, make the wrong moves, you could be in some real trouble and make it worse. But fuel is a big deal, as everybody knows, and it can stop trade. It does affect every part of the world: trade, commerce, economics. So I think what OPEC announced, a 2 million barrel drop in output, if in fact that's what occurs. Now, I've talked to some people and read some articles that, in fact, that may not be what happens. It may be more like 500,000 barrels. But that announcement said 2 million. So that's what you've got to work off of that reality. And again, I don't have a good answer, but there are not a lot of answers to this other than you've got to continue to work it and work it with particularly friends and allies of ours in OPEC, and to see if we can move this around. Unfortunately, the Middle East, in my opinion, is more dangerous than any time I think we've ever seen, because every country is upside down and it's got problems, and some of them get more intense and they get deeper. And when that happens, then there are no boundaries. I mean, everything is explosive, and you can't control it. And then what happens further is countries like Russia use that. Iran is another part of this. So you've got China moving into some of those Middle East countries, trying to work deals and using all of this disruption. This is not new for themselves, the Chinese. You've got the Russians doing the same thing. They're in Syria. I mean, when I was Secretary of Defense at the time, when the chemical weapon issue arose in Syria in 2013, 2014, and when President Obama said, essentially, that's the red line. And then we found out through the United Nations inspections and our own inspections that, in fact, the Syrian leader did use chemical weapons. Then we did not respond to that. That was a mistake. And one of the reasons it was a mistake, maybe the biggest, is it allowed Russia to get back in. They had been shut out. Russia was not in the Middle East. They had the little base in the Mediterranean in Syria, Tartus. That's all they had. But over the years, they've been shut out. This allowed the Russians to get back in and play. And they did. And so they're back in the game. Of course, the Iranians are the Iranians. So then you got the terrorist groups that have developed over the years. And so I know I'm getting a little far afield from your question, but it's all part of this. And that's why it's so complicated.
If I could follow up, there have been years past, Senator Hagel, that there's flirtation with legislation that would strip OPEC of sovereign immunity for price fixing, which ordinarily would be a criminal violation. The Sherman Act, they strip sovereign immunity for nations that engage in state sponsors of terrorism. Is that kind of approach workable, or is it really just going to be paper and you couldn't really enforce an antitrust law in all these countries, as the terrorist countries are, to damages even if you don't collect?
Bruce, I think right now with the state of affairs in the world, it's probably unworkable. I look at sanctions and tariffs, and the tariffs on China that President Trump put in place. I've been surprised the last almost 2 years of the Biden administration that he has not dealt with that in our trade relationships. I think tariffs are insane. They hurt everybody. And I don't know what you get out of them. How many times you've got to figure that out. So it says to me that there's not a lot of focus on this. And I think partly because your specific point, it's not maybe because they don't want to focus on it or don't think it's important, but they've got so damn many other issues coming at them that they don't have time. They don't have resources. They don't have hours in the day. They just, if you're sitting over there as President of the United States today, Tony Blinken and State Department, you've got stuff coming at you that you don't even anticipate until OPEC Plus announcement yesterday. Just in the Ukrainian war, what Putin's doing, the threat of nuclear weapons, the crazy kid in North Korea. It's just our economy, inflation everywhere. What's going on in Great Britain? I don't know how long that prime minister lasts. That country is really upside down. We could have Bassam talk about that. And dangerously. We don't want to see that. Probably our most vital ally in every way is upside down, and they can't govern. So I don't think it's probably working or enforceable now.
I want to ask two questions about, you served in Congress and the executive branch, then we open it up, and I apologize, ask your patience. One, it relates to, congressional power. The first one is the negotiations about the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. You're in the Senate. Isn't this a treaty? And why isn't this, isn't a treaty essential in order to give Iran confidence that the next president's going to come in and undo it?
Well, yes, I have had a lot of feelings about that. Not just that issue, the JCPOA, and why the president didn't move to make it a treaty. Well, it's obvious why he didn't, because he couldn't get it through Congress. So presidents over the years, Republican and Democrat, what they've done, they've made an executive order, they've used their executive powers to implement these things because they know they couldn't get them done in Congress. They couldn't get a treaty passed, especially over the last few years.
But isn't that's like saying you're going to issue an executive order because you don't think Congress will pass a law? Isn't the process critical here? You can't just decide that you don't like the treaty clause and throw it out. The executive agreements have no textual text in the Constitution.
Well, I'm not defending it. I'm just telling you why they've done it. The constitutional language and the legality of what you're talking about is exactly right. It's clear. But again, my point is, if you go back to Bush, Bush got us into the two wars, couldn't get us out. After 20 years, we finally got out. Well, if you go back and read some of that history on the line that went on before we went into Iraq and so on, and it's not just Bush, it's Obama. Presidents actually going back, I was in the Reagan administration, going back to his days, and Johnson, all presidents use this finding ways to get around not having to take it to Congress. And Congress has abdicated, in my opinion, a lot of that responsibility. Congress, it depends on the party in power. If you've got a Senate of the same party as the president, then they work out a deal. Well, Mr. President, Majority Leader, this is our party, it's politics, so on and so on. That always gets caught up in it. And again, I'm not defending it. I'm just giving you the facts of life as to why this happens. And so, but actually, a treaty can be broken too, as you know.
You can revoke them.
Yeah. And so that's not a guarantee.
No.
At all. It's better to have a treaty to say to Raisi, this is the deal with the treaty. I know that, but you get what you can get, and if you think this is the right approach, and I do, but it was my opinion, and I helped write the JCPOA and help get it done for a lot of reasons. It's imperfect, but I support it, and I still do. So
The second is, this is congressional oversight and the war powers. That you were in the Senate, and isn't one of the reasons why there's lack of public confidence in Congress is because it simply abdicated its responsibilities? Afghanistan, we spent over $300 billion every day for 20 successive years. No oversight, no sanctions, no accountability of any sort whatsoever. We're the J. William Fulbrights. You were there. Did you have, you remember J. William Fulbright? Hasn't Congress just disappeared, and there's a legitimate reason why there's no confidence in it?
Well, if you want to go back and take a look at some of those hearings, the Foreign Relations Committee hearings, and I was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee 12 years, you will find that Senator Hagel asked the very same questions of Rumsfeld, of all of them. And we were continually told, no, just another year. I mean, we had 4-star generals tell the committee that our troops would be out by Christmas on a couple of occasions. But then they would end the testimony, well, if you just give us 50,000 more troops and a couple more $1 billion, we can really finish this quick. Then that happened. That was the story of Vietnam too. And so the Congress just is timid and just let it go. But not to, as they say, blow my own horn here. But if you go back and look at those hearings, there's one senator, Senator Hagel, that asked the tough questions, and I was not satisfied with it because I knew what was going on. The other point, take me out of it. The Inspector General of Afghanistan would take a year, and he would go in and investigate every dollar, and he would bring those reports back to the White House, the Defense Department, the State Department, and the Congress. And I was about the only one, I think, that would give the guy any time. I think Biden did actually as well, but I was about the only guy who would give him time. I'd have him come in with my staff and take 2 hours and go through what he found. And it was all there. Year after year after year, what you just said, 300 million, 450 million, can't find. Where'd it go? Contractors, bogus contractors, just outright thievery of what was going on over there. I mean, it was there. The Inspector General told us year after year, and the Congress just let it go. Just let it go. Didn't want to make trouble for the White House. The White House would say, "Oh well," and it was a White House appointed individual. Well, we don't want to interfere. We're getting close to winding this up. We're almost there, and all the corruption just got deeper and deeper and deeper. Let me give you one example of that. When we came out more than a year ago of Afghanistan, one of the reasons that the Afghan army failed, and we all knew it was failing, and one of the specific main reasons it was failing is because the Afghans, could not maintain the equipment. They could not maintain helicopters that we gave, airplanes and so on. Why was that? Well, because those are multi-year, multi-million-dollar contracts that were going to American contractors. So the American contractors would go in and tell their congressmen and their senators, geez, we don't want to lose that contract. I mean, all the people that are working out in Nebraska or Michigan or wherever, no, I mean, we don't want to lose that. So we kept all that to ourselves. We paid our own contractors, so the Afghans never learned out to pull maintenance, the most basic maintenance. So when we get ready to leave, the word's out, we're leaving, and so on and so on. Hell, those helicopters, planes, all the sophisticated equipment there was useless. Afghans because they didn't know how to maintain it. No, we did a terrible job. It was such a it was such a failure for the people of the way we left them. I don't mean the way we left them, just the terrible way we ran out, and which everybody saw in the world, and what a fiasco that was. But what we left the Afghan people with, it's terrible, and history is going to not be kind to the United States government, and it's already, books are starting to be written. A lot of talk about it. It was a great failure, as was Iraq. Iraq was a terrible failure for all the obvious reasons, which I've always felt that what we did in Iraq was really the beginning of turning the Middle East completely upside down.
All right, let's go to the audience here. Tim.
Tim Constantine with the Capitol Hill Show and the Washington Times. Mr. Secretary, you started out by talking about America's role in the world and how important that is, and if we abdicate that role in any part of the world, it gets filled probably by bad actors. Thank you. Traditionally, obviously, we have a presidential election every 4 years, and so traditionally, either in 4 years or in 8 years' time, we have a change of administration. But traditionally, the domestic policy has changed with the parties. That may be economic plans, that may be education, that may be, but those things vary. But historically, there seemed to be a general line that our international policies followed. And they might move some with any individual presidential administration, but the United States as a whole seemed to have a direction or a role in the globe. You mentioned President Bush. When we go Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, it seems as though we have veered wildly from administration to administration on foreign policy. How dangerous is that, and how difficult does that make your old job at DOD or Secretary of State to accomplish their job when other countries are thinking, okay, is there going to be a change in 2024?
Well, that's a very good question. And I don't want to make this into a raw political discussion, because I've got David Keene sitting here. So, but I have to answer your question this way to begin with. What Newt Gingrich started in 1994, the contract with America, was the beginning of disaster, in my opinion, for the Republican Party and for cooperation in politics in the Congress. Some of you may remember that, and the Republicans took control of the House. Remember that you wanted to run for office, you had to sign the contract with America. Then that got us into Grover Norquist's tax. You have to sign this pledge. No new taxes and so what that did is that said to the party, unless you agree with every point here, you're not a Republican. You're a rhino, Republican in name only, and you need to be pushed out of the party. So there was no room for to think differently, ask questions. No, this is it. I'm all right all the time. You're all wrong all the time. So you don't deserve anything. That led to the Tea Party. I saw it. 12 years I was there. There was that whole process because I got there in '96. Well, what all that did, that forced everything into politics, foreign policy included. and changes. And so a president takes office, a new president, I mean, any new president that comes into office is gonna owe a lot of people, a lot of things. I mean, nobody gets there alone. Biden took office probably owing more to more people than any president in history, for obvious reasons. I mean, as you know, he was a dead man before South Carolina, and Clyburn and South Carolina turned him around, and there are all kinds of arrangements and deals that were made as a result of all that going forward. But, you know, politics is politics, I get it. But that was the beginning of what happened in international relations when people would cooperate. Now, you go back to some of those committees, you go back to Fulbright, some of them, and I'm just rereading the first book out on Johnson, 1972 or something like that. Doris Kearns Godwin wrote it, and I'm particularly interested in the Senate during his 10 years as leader, minority leader, how he changed things, and then when he was vice president and so on. Because this all, I mean, I know it's a long answer, but it all affects your question, because the shift in international policy was gradual. We saw it coming with all of them. I mean, and I think it was Clinton, Bush, Obama. Then comes Trump. Trump probably did more than all the other presidents put together to turn everything upside down and to really scare the hell out of our foreign friends and change policy. I mean, you go right through it, whether it's tariffs, I don't care what it is. Decimated the State Department. Over 2,000 career diplomats leave the State Department. They all resigned. And I'm not blaming it all on Trump, but what he did was really dramatic, change international relations. But all of them started, I think, since that contract with America, because they were forced, because the party was so dominant with them. And that affected the midterm elections. And what do you really stand for, Mr. Senator or Congressman? And you had to hew that line. And one of the reasons I didn't run for a third term, I had said that I only wanted to, 12 years in, right at the beginning. When I first started, the day after I was elected, in 96, I was interviewed by the Illinois World Herald. And I said, if I do a good job, the good people of Nebraska, if they reelect me in 6 years, then 12 years is enough. I think that's enough. You need fresh ideas, new people, new energy. And I'm not speaking for anybody else, but for Chuck Hagel, that's good. And I held to that, but I did rethink it. A lot of people said, no, you got to run again, and so on and so on. And the reason I didn't run again is because of what was going on, what I saw. And I said, I'm not going to waste another 6 years of my life having to deal with this. But again, I'm getting a little far afield from your question, but there's no doubt that what you're saying, or your question, your comment, is right. There's one other element to this, in my opinion, that has changed it dramatically. When George Bush took office in January of 2001, George W. Bush, the world was in pretty good shape. I mean, we had the Balkans issue, and that was died down. Yeah, China was there, it was growing, but it was not a threat. Russia was still a basket case, a joke. And Clinton handed to George W. Bush a balanced budget. Not bad. Much because of George H.W. Bush. Because the tough decision he made, which cost him his reelection, raising taxes, and he had probably the smartest guy that I've ever known in Washington in every job he's had, Jim Baker, as Secretary of Treasury. Bush had the best team I've ever seen. Scowcroft, Powell, Baker, Cheney, that's a question mark. But anyway, he did. He had a tremendous team. And George H.W. Bush was from the school, is you put America first and you do the right thing for the country. I mean, we haven't seen that since in politics, in my opinion. So the issues became, on George W. Bush's watch, 9/11. That really turned the world upside down. America being attacked, and that changed everything. That truly changed everything. That dominated, still does, the thinking, our foreign policy thinking in this country. Look at what's happened in the Middle East, ISIS, Al Qaeda, so on and so on and so on. And then other terrorist groups in North Africa, around Africa. So you've seen these terrorist groups rise. That has dominated the thinking of every president, every secretary of state, every secretary of defense. And everything else comes second to that. And then you have all the other issues that we've talked about, oil and economy and so on. But that changed everything. And what we did in the Senate, just to remind you of a couple of things, within 12 months after that happened, we brought forward Department of Homeland Security. There had been no Department of Homeland Security before that. We rolled together 22 different departments and agencies into one agency, one department. That probably was a mistake, rolling 22 agencies and departments together, which is, that place is a mess. The poor secretary can't manage it. It's just, they don't have any common threads, those, but anyway, we've got it. Something we did that I think is right, and it's very effective. We put in place a director of international intelligence, NDI, National Director of Intelligence, and bringing the 16 independent intelligence agencies under one management. I mean, they're all independent still, and that's the way they should be. But at least there's cohesion, because we all know one of the reasons we had 9/11, because the FBI was not talking to the CIA and they were keeping their information, and we had no cross-pollination, and it was crazy. Well, we've changed a lot of that. We made things a lot better the last 22 years. But all of that has affected your question and why things are the way they are today. I hope that we can find a time to get back to, when I first joined the Foreign Relations Committee, we had a Foreign Relations Committee that actually got along. I mean, you had Dick Lugar and Joe Biden. I mean, these guys worked together. Even Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee when I became a member. And even Jesse, tough as he was and conservative as he was, he got along with people. I mean, he and Biden was ranking and they'd get along, and Jesse worked with everybody. But everybody kind of had a fundamental approach. Their responsibility was America. And America's not Republicans, not Democrats. Yeah, you were Republican, you were Democrat, you had your philosophical differences. But in the end, you made it work. And one other thing, maybe the most important of all, and now I'm really off the subject, but I'm a former senator, as I said. When we lost the World War II generation of senators in the Senate, when I got to the Senate, we had some World War II veterans. We had Pat Moynihan, way liberal. We had Ted Stevens, way conservative. We had John Warner. We had some senators from Dale Bumpers from the South, Wendell Ford, Fritz Hollings from South Carolina. We had about, I think, 8 or 9 World War. What they did for that body, they were the compass. They were the North Star. I mean, we'd sit in our Tuesday lunches. Democrats have them, Republicans have them, and some senator might get up in a Republican luncheon and say, "I got a great idea. Let's screw the Democrats and make them take a tough vote on whatever it is, and put them in this thing, and it'd be fun." And everybody goes, "Yeah, that's a good idea because this." John Warner would sit back, Ted Stevens sit back there, not say a word. At the end of the luncheon, one of them would say, "Mr. Chairman of the conference, may I say something?" Senator Warner would get up. Warner would say, those of you who know him, knew his style, very gentlemanly. Now, Senator, that's a good idea. it's got a lot of potential, what you just recommended, but, let's just kind of think about this a minute. And, there are consequences to these things. If we start down that road, we may not want to go all the way down that road, and we're going to get caught in the middle of it. And, I like the idea, but we might want to think about it. Just kind of think. That deal was dead right there. Water would sit down, you go over and pat the other senator on the back. You're a great American, and that was it. When we lost that, we lost the North Star, and we kind of floundered. We really did. We floundered in the Senate. I mean, who was the leader? Well, we had a majority leader, minority leader. We had elected leaders, but who was the leader? What were we all about? And you had very few veterans, and so you couldn't rely on that. And it was just kind of, and then we had 9/11, like I said. It was a tough time because nobody knew what to do. I don't know, this has never happened before. So it was a tough time. But those World War II leaders, I think back every day as to how important they were to our country, and especially to that body, to the Senate. We'll come back. We'll get back. And there are a number of young Democrat, Republican senators and congressmen who are stable, secure in their own thinking. Yes, they're politicians, but they're not defined by the job they hold. And I used to tell people for years and years and years, don't be captive to that. I mean, I see too many people, I serve them. Their identity is their title. They define themselves by the office they hold. You can't do that. And that's a part of you, but you're bigger than a United States senator or anything else. So I always said I can walk away from those jobs anytime I want. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I will do something else. Not that I'm a role model for any of that, but I think that's the way you've got to, when you do this job, that's the way you've got to approach it. Because you're not going to be loved by everybody. You're going to make mistakes. But if you're guided, again, with a North Star, do what you think is right all the time, regardless. Some people will lose their office, but they can sleep at night, and history will treat them very well.
This lady over here. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Secretary. I would really like to hear your opinion on the current situation, the current Biden strategy in the Ukraine war. Washington has given some $15 billion in weapons so far to Ukraine. There's more to come. Many are anticipating this to be what's being called a long, hard slog. Critics say that there's not an equal investment in the diplomatic track to try and end the violence and pursue negotiated settlement. Others say that American resources aren't unlimited and worry that we might be getting in a proxy war situation akin to Afghanistan in the late 70s. Americans are seeing in poll after poll that they're worried about a direct confrontation with Russia and perhaps a nuclear war. So I know that's a lot to throw at you, but I was wondering if you could lend your insights.
Well, again, I don't have any particular insight in knowing what the Biden administration is planning or doing, other than what's obvious, what's out there. And conversations I have with Blinken and Austin, so, I mean, I don't ever ask them to share anything with me that they don't feel comfortable with. And I don't think they do. That's the way it should be. That said, I think what Biden is doing, how he's handling this is pretty good. And I'll tell you why. first of all, I don't need to remind anybody here around this table, this is a complicated issue. This is, yes, about Russia and us, Russia and the West. It's about the future of Europe. What Putin has done, he's violated the very premise of how a new world order was founded after World War II. He's violated that. He's invaded another country in Europe. You've got the economic consequences of this. Fuel, trade, everything turned upside down. Hunger, terrible hunger problems are resulting from this. And as I said earlier in my comments, there's not a country in the world today that's unaffected by this war. Now, all said that Biden is trying to keep the West together at a time that the West, as we've said before, is heading into the winter with limited fuel. That's a huge part of this, and I think he's done a very good job of that so far. You got Germany continuing to move a little bit further and further away, and each country, you got who knows what you're going to have in Italy. Sweden's got a new government. UK, I think, will be okay on this issue, but who knows? With Truss and how long she'll be there and that fiasco. So that's one part of this. Second is the military part that you mentioned. I mean, it's now $16.5 billion that they've committed. We're committing more and more, which I think is right, in my opinion, and more sophisticated weaponry. Careful with that, because I was Secretary of Defense in 2014 when Russia took Crimea, some of the eastern parts of Ukraine. We couldn't do a hell of a lot because the Ukrainian army was a joke. And so in late 2014, we started using special ops to go in and train them. And the Ukrainian army has been trained by U.S. Special Operations and the Europeans, the British have been in there and so on. So they've got a pretty damn good army now. And not perfect, but you all have seen what's happened in the last 7 months versus Russia's army. And Russia's got the better weapons, it's got a lot of advantages. So we're giving them more accelerated, sophisticated weaponry. In my opinion, that's the right thing to do. You've got to look at this as Biden is from a long-term perspective too. Where is this going? If Putin is allowed to get away with this, I mean, that is going to change everything. Well, Ukraine's got a history. I mean, actually, what's now Russia began 5 centuries ago in Kyiv, and all the history. If you know the history of Russia and Ukraine, and you get a lot of this. So it's complicated, but you can't let him get away with this. I don't think, for a lot of reasons. So at the same time, how do you then try to look down the road? Because it's always about the future. How do we end this damn thing? How do we get out of this damn thing? I'm sure that diplomatically they are working on some things. I think China will be important in this. I think China would be important if Xi says to Putin, you got to stop this. You've been reading various accounts of how the Chinese are moving away from Russia on a lot of this. Well, it's an embarrassment. It's wrong. The Chinese don't want this kind of a world for their own. They've got big internal issues, the Chinese do. So I wouldn't be surprised if you've got the White House and Blinken working quietly with the Chinese and some others. I know Macron's tried to do something. He's not going to have any effect for a lot of reasons. Erdogan has tried to get involved. Erdogan could have some impact for different reasons. But bottom line, I am sure, because I know Biden so well, he is thinking about how do we diplomatically get out of this? But at the same time, Russia can't win this. So you've got to have the other side be involved too. It can't be one-sided. So what does Putin get out of this? I mean, he's already in a lot of trouble, as you all know. And what the public knows, it's a lot worse than what just the public knows. What's going on in Russia? A lot worse. He's not stupid. He knows that. The oligarchs, those close to him, know it. A lot of movement away from him. Where that goes, I don't know. We know that. Our intelligence has got good stuff on this. Bill Burns is the right guy to be at the CIA. He probably understands Putin and the Russians better than anybody today, for reasons you all know. Plus, I think Bill Burns is the class of his generation in diplomacy. I don't think there's anybody better that's been around than Bill Burns for the last 20 years. So, I don't know, other than when I've told you what I think, and I judge that based on a few things I do.
This gentleman here.
Thank you.
Over it's yours.
I understand that when you were, during your tenure as Secretary of State, there was no Senator Chuck Hagel to ask you the tough questions. But what I'd like,
Oh, no, they asked me tough questions.
what I wanted to know was, and I mean no disrespect by this, but I can't think of anyone in a better position to answer the question. What were the obstacles that prevented Secretary of State Chuck Hagel from volunteering the information that would have been useful to the Congress in making its decisions?
Secretary of Defense,
Secretary of Defense, I'm sorry.
John Kerry would be offended.
My apologies to both of you.
Yeah. I'm not sure I got your question. What would be,
What were the obstacles? In other words, without being asked the tough question, although you said you were asked the question. But what were the obstacles that prevented you from telling them the things you just told us about what was going wrong that they should have known in order to make their funding decisions?
Including Afghanistan.
In
Yeah.
Afghanistan especially.
yeah. Well, first of all, I did tell them, privately. You can't say something like that as a Secretary of Defense, publicly, going into it as deep as I did. I mean, that's the administration, and that goes public, and then, oh my God, and then it'd be revolution if you said that. So you've got to do it privately. There are ways to communicate this, and you can do it privately, and many of you know that. Been around the world. No, I did. I made it very clear. I mean, I owed it to them. Plus, I was a product of their body. I mean, I've always taken the position that three co-equal branches of government are essential, absolutely essential, and they ebb and flow with power. Here's a constitutional specialist sitting next to me, so I don't want to talk too much about the Constitution, but as you all know, that power ebbs and flows. I mean, after Watergate, Congress tried to really take a lot of power away from the White House because of Nixon and so on and so on. Then it comes back and back, but I'm an officer of the administration, so at that time as Secretary of Defense, my responsibility, yes, is to the country and to all of us, but I worked in the administration for the president. And so that was my official responsibility. But at the same time, that didn't limit me, nor did Obama ever tell me, well, don't tell him that, or don't be honest with him. I mean, he never said that, ever said anything like that to me. And I would tell him what I would say. But I would say to the chairman and other members of the committee privately some of this stuff. And then I would say some of it publicly too. But it's far better to work a lot of this stuff working privately, so that it doesn't get caught up in the press, it doesn't get caught up in politics, and so on and so on and so on, because it always does. So that's my explanation. But no, I never ever deferred to the executive on, well, the legislative shouldn't, they don't need to know this. Never, 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 no.
Could I just follow up a little bit here and ask, were there instances where the members that received the information you told them that without identifying you as the source could have made this information to the public and made it part of the general policy debate? And if they
Yeah.
stayed silent, why was that?
Well, yes, to answer your first question, yes. I mean, a member could do that. Or phrase it in a way that asks a question. I mean, they could turn around, and this is another way you do this. They asked me the question at a public hearing. And of course, very few times does a senator ask a question and he doesn't know the answer. I mean, he may be too dumb to know the answer, but his staff sure as hell knows the answer. And the staff will give him the answer. So rarely when you got a tough question, when you ask somebody, I'll never forget when I asked the home loan bank board president how much he made. We had issues on the banking committee, and they said, well, I don't know how much I make. I said, really? You have no idea what your salary is? No. Funny thing. I said, does your wife know? And he said, well, maybe, I don't know. I said, well, sir, let me tell you how much you make here. I mean, come on. I mean, something like that is pretty dumb. But you can a member can turn that around and you ask the question of the senator on money or, now we spend whatever, where's that, do you think that's getting down to where it needs to go? Do you think there's corruption in that money, Mr. Secretary? And I got some of those questions, by the way.
Yeah, this gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is Bassam Baramedia from Syria. There are Syrian assumptions that United States during 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, they sacrificed Syria as incentive for Iran. Do you think this fair assessment from Syria?
Do I think what?
It is fair assessment from Syria that United States sacrificed Syria or gave Syria to Iran in order to protect the nuclear deal in 2015. There's many Syrians believe this would happen. So do you think it's fair assessment from Syria?
Well, a fair assessment that we sacrificed Syria?
To protect the deal or to give the Iran the deal in 2015?
The JCPOA.
Oh, I see. No, I don't think that was the case. In fact, I know it wasn't the case. I think as I said earlier, I think we made some mistakes in Syria, and one of them was not responding to the threat President Obama. This is the red line, and we'll respond. Matter of fact, I think many of you know that we gave him the president some options what to do, and he chose the one we recommended. And I'll never forget this. I was on a plane coming back from a NATO meeting in Europe, and they had a National Security Council meeting. The president presided over it. He went around the table and they brought me in a closed circuit, secure closed circuit, to ask the final question on the option as to how should we strike Syria, when, where, specific. And he went around the table asking, does everyone agree? Secretary of State, CIA Director, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and so on, and me, Secretary of Defense, and so on. And we all said yes. That operation was put in place that afternoon. I landed at Andrews about 6 o'clock that night, Friday night. Went home, took a shower, changed clothes, and Elizabeth and I went to dinner. And in the middle of dinner, at about 9 o'clock, my security guys came in and got me and said, Mr. Secretary, the President wants to talk to you. It's urgent. And the first thought I had was, oh my God, the plane's been shut down or something's happened. And I said, okay. They cleared the car, and the President came on the line and he said, Chuck, he said, I want to pull down the operation. This is in the middle of the operation. I want to pull down the operation. And we're going to have a National Security Council meeting tomorrow morning. I'll explain everything to you. And I want to call Marty next. Marty Dempsey, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So I said, okay, Mr. President, and we'll take care of it. I called Dempsey right away, telling him what was coming. And I'm telling Marty, you're going to get a call from the president here any moment, but we need to pull it down. And we need to pull it now. So Marty was, I think, on his second scotch, maybe his third, which led to his fourth. And he said, oh, Christ, okay. He said, I've got to put my drink down and make some calls. But that's what happened. And as I said earlier, I think because of that, the consequences of us not doing anything, that sent a very clear signal to Putin on Syria. And the Syrians went right to the Russians. We knew they would. Our intelligence showed us that they had been talking to the Russians. But the Russians didn't want to get involved directly against us. But the signal was clear when we refused to do anything, and we wanted to get out of Syria. You remember we had people in there. We still got special ops people in the Northeast, but then the Iranians were in there, and it was a mess. But I don't think your question. I don't think it was a matter of that we said to Iran, "You can have Syria," and that's part of the deal. That's just not true. I'm sorry.
I said, why did Obama stop the operation?
It was never fully explained. By the way, the press had enough of it. They didn't have all the top secret stuff. They didn't hear, on what we were going to do. But they had enough of something's going on, and then they got stopped. But we were told that that we had made a deal, or we were going to try and make a deal with the Russians to get all of Saddam's chemical weapons and precursors to chemical weapons out. You remember this? We had ships in the Mediterranean and working with the Russians. That was kind of a shaky explanation because that deal had not been done. That deal was first suggested earlier in 2014 in London with Kerry and Lavrov suggested it. It's maybe something we can work together on in Syria in helping Assad get all of the chemical weapons and precursors out. And we show the world that we're doing something. And Kerry said that's an interesting idea, but it never went anywhere until this. And we kind of pulled this out of our hat to say, well, this is the reason we didn't take any kinetic action. This is a better approach. We can get all the chemical weapons out. Of course, we didn't. We knew that Assad wasn't going to give up everything. We got a lot of stuff out, but it allowed the Russians in, and they never left. They just kept bringing more and more and more troops in, and then building up that little base in Tartus. We have what we have now. Russia's in the driver's seat on those decisions with Iran and what Assad's going to do and what's going to happen.
This gentleman here,
I'd like to address,
would you like to get a microphone?
I'd like you to address the headline behind you, the direction or directionless nature of the American empire. We've spent a little over 6 years trying to develop a meaningful national strategy. The Trump administration outlined 2 sort of pointless summaries, which the Biden administration virtually copied, but it never addressed any force changes shifting to deal with China, force posture for NATO, rebalancing our forces in the Middle East. And I think about 2 weeks ago, the Biden administration announced it was going to issue the strategy, and nothing happened. And that not only applies to the strategy, we don't have a program budget, and we don't have a defense budget tied to the strategy or a force posture plan. So where do we go to get a direction?
Well, first of all, you all know this gentleman. He's one of the smartest, he's one of the smartest professionals in this town on foreign policy and so many other things. So I always took his wise advice when I was in office. I don't know, to answer your question. It's something that I said earlier in answer to a question and alluded to it a couple other times. There's so much going on in the world that whether it's Biden or Trump or whoever the next president is, if there is a next president versus Biden, I don't know. They're dealing with so much. And to come up with a clear answer, what is the direction, including everything that you talked about that needs to be in a real document that gives this country's direction. I don't know if they're capable of doing that because of so much going on. And if they do that, then there'll be those out there who will criticize it and be critical of it because it will leave out some things, or it'll include some new things, or whatever. I mean, this is not an excuse for Biden at all. But I don't know the answer to your question why they've not come forward yet. It's something that I know that Biden has been over the years. When I served with him on the Foreign Relations Committee, Vice President, has been very involved in and wants to do. But my guess is it's just there's just so much going on that either they can't come up with it, or they don't know, or they don't want to come out with it now. And I know it's not a good answer, but it's the only one I know. Because when you lay this out, as you have noted with the pieces in it that need to be in it that you mentioned, that then sets you clearly on a direct and clear path of what your policy is going to be. Kinetic force, diplomacy, economics, all the components of foreign policy. And military policy as to when you use military and when you don't. And just by the definition of it, you're going to have things left out of that because you're not going to be able to cover everything. And I think they probably just having a hard time defining it all.
If I could just add, I served in the government as long as you, 15, 20 years. But the fact is, the first day any administration takes office, they always establish a long-term planning unit. And it never meets again. Every day there's a new crisis, and it happens in every single administration. It's never changed. I've been here 50 years. This gentleman here.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so
Want to
much.
wait for your microphone?
If I want to just go a little bit to the future, you probably served in the last administration that both parties had non-divided base. Both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party right now have a very divided basis. Where do you see it? We're almost 30 days from now, we're going to have an election, but then 2024 is coming. Do you think both bases could get back to each other, both parties, but also within each party itself, the Democrat can actually rally around each other, and the same thing for the Republicans, specifically after Trump election. Is there any future hope that these both parties gonna get back together and do things right for their own bases separately? Thank you.
For the short term, I don't think so. The presidential election starts the day after the midterm.
Right.
And a lot of questions hanging on to, does Biden run again? Does he not? Does Trump run? Does he not? Who are the backup candidates? What about Harris? What about, there'll be no effort for parties to come together at all. It's gonna be a jungle. It's gonna be pretty nasty, I think. But I think the consequences, the effects of this election are gonna be very nasty. Because there are gonna be some people lose that are not gonna accept it. And you know where that's leading, and Trump keeps stirring that up, and I didn't lose 2020, and so do a lot of the candidates, Republican candidates for Senate and governor say the same thing. So it's the only way I see this, what you're saying eventually happening, and I do see it eventually happening, is if for some reason there is a new president in 2024, not Biden, not Trump, who would take a whole different approach to things and their administration. That could be the beginning. That could be the beginning, but it's going to take some time. I mean, if you look at the candidates now that are in the news, most projected on the Republican side, these guys are pretty close to where Trump is. DeSantis being one, not much difference. I think DeSantis is smarter than Trump. He knows how to use government. Trump never did. And Trump was Trump. Trump ran the government like he ran his businesses for 40 years, all lies and all the rest. But DeSantis is different, I think, that way. I don't know what the Democrats do if Biden doesn't run again. My guess is that he will not run again for obvious reasons. I don't know that. But that'll open up a hell of a fight in the Democratic Party too. But if for some reason you get a new president that maybe has an epiphany or something, but he's going to be forced by his party too. I mean, you just can't. A president just didn't take office and say, "Okay, now we're all going to go my way." It doesn't happen that way. But you can get enough, as I mentioned earlier, you've got a number of young Democrat, Republican members of Congress and Senate who you can work with. They know what's going on, what's been going on is wrong. They know that. And they don't want to put their head up too high on this. They're just starting and they really have little influence. But all that could come together. My guess is that if you get the right president, you could start developing that in the 24 to 28 time period. And maybe when you get to 28, I know that's pretty pessimistic, but that's the way I see it. It's the reality. I mean, just as you guys know, just look at the television ads. I mean, just look at what's going on a month before the midterms. The brutality of all these races. I mean, it's just every year it gets worse and worse and worse. And I mean, look at Georgia. I mean, what's going on down there with Walker and the abortion issue, his son coming out. I mean, it just Pennsylvania. I mean, you go right down through these states. We've never seen anything quite like this in this country. And rather than it getting less confrontational and nasty, it gets worse every election cycle. Because the pros who run these things, and David Keene knows a lot about this business, the campaign managers, the guys who run television, the guys who advise candidates say, no, you got to take his head off. I mean, you got to kill him. You got to embarrass him. You have to do it with bring his family into it too. And you got to really go at him. It's just a different time. How do you break that? I don't know. It's other than what I just said. It's more hope than maybe reality, but I'm still optimistic about it. It can be. If for no other reason, I think this. I mean, how many people do you know? Just your average neighbor, average person. He's got his or her job. They've got the family. They involved in maybe helping coach the kids' little league or do something, volunteer, a church, synagogue, mosque, maybe a little religion, maybe 4 or 5 interests they have in their lives and their neighborhood. Politics normally is not one of those top 4 or 5 in most people. It's the very noisy minority that gets all the attention and the headlines and all the rest. And what's happening here is it's turning off a lot of people, a lot of good people, Democrats and Republicans. I mean, why do we have to? Must be Putin. Why do we have to do this? I mean, can't you just run for office and you say what you believe and what you do, and that's the real hope in this country.
This just.
I think we're running out of time. Do you have 10 more minutes?
If you guys want, I'll give short answers.
Yeah, go
What's
ahead.
this? Yeah, go. You're on.
Okay,
The mic's right behind.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's a great honor to see you in person and the foundation to hold this event. Very timely. And I think I'm Sam Nishihata. I'm originally from Japan. You mentioned China was not a great threat at your time, but now China has become probably the biggest threat for democratic countries. And regarding its economic influence, the military expansion, and also human rights abuse in Xinjiang and in other areas. What do you have any prospect for the future of U.S.-China relations? What would you do if you were director of DoD at this time to counter China's threat? Thank you.
Well, I don't think countering China's threat is going to come only from the Pentagon. In dealing with China, you deal with the whole of China and the United States and all the issues. Now, yesterday, some of you may have seen the 4-star admiral's comments publicly, and I was surprised he made them public, about how the United States could block a Chinese blockade around Taiwan. Some of you saw that. And as I said, I was a little surprised that he went into that much detail. That's an example of why the Pentagon is so important here. But it's more than that, because military strategy and policy always follows diplomatic strategy. You can't let one get out ahead of the other. You can't let the defense strategy get out ahead of diplomacy strategy. Those are mistakes we made in Iraq and Afghanistan, quite frankly. Diplomacy strategy always has to be in front of defense. And so therefore, economic realities and interests are part of this. In 2014, I met with Xi 3 times in China. And the conversations were all about freedom of navigation of the seas of South China Sea, East China Sea, what the Chinese were doing, building up those little rocks in those seas and building them into islands. And they were saying it was for commercial fishing purposes, all lies. And I had to tell Xi, Mr. President, we know that's not true. you're building runways and airplane hangars for your jets, so on and so on. Well, they were not pleasant conversations that I had with Xi. The reason I bring those up is because we were talking about economics more than anything else, freedom of navigation, those seas. And I said, we will never allow any open sea in the world to be taken hostage to you or anybody else. And I warned him about that. But we really talked about commerce and trade and economics more than anything else. So that's got to be also part of it. You've got to also factor in certainly the Indo-Pacific, the importance of Japan, South Korea, Australia in this. They have to be part of this as well. And Japan's taken a very tough stand on Ukraine and China, as you know. And that has to be factored in. Now, we lead it. Another thing that you just saw last week when we had the 12 Indo-Pacific nations in Washington for a conference for a day where they signed a declaration about, I think Biden first committed $650 million last week to helping those countries build up, and then more economic issues and so on. Well, that's a direct result, obviously, of the Chinese being all over that area, especially what they're doing in the Solomon Islands. And so that's a part of this. So to answer your question, you've got to have strategies and policies that use the Defense Department, yes, and the strength of the Navy, and our allies. Allies have always been important in the history of the world. Certainly they were in World War II, World War I, World War II, especially, but I think allies today are more important than any time in history. The United States power, strength, presence, reach is absolutely limited by our relationship with allies. I mean, we couldn't project power in the world if we didn't have the bases that we've got because of our allies allowing us to be there. And yes, it's helpful to them in most cases, but for us, it's indispensable. We've got to have those bases. So you can't leave your partners out either. You have to be part of this. And I think we've made a mistake in diplomacy in the last 25 years by doing too much alone, or we'll do it and then we'll tell you how it's going to be. Good example of that, different kind of example, but how we treated Afghanistan after the Trump people made the deal with the Taliban in Qatar. They cut the deal, the Trump people and the Taliban, leaving the Afghan government totally out of it. This is what it's going to be. Then we go back to Ghani and the Afghan government and we say, we just made a new deal for you. This is what's going to happen in your country. We're going to leave. Oh, by the way, you're going to release 5,000 prisoners, 5,000 bad guys. And I know you won't have a problem with that, Mr. Ghani. And so on and so on. That's the way we did that deal. And then all of that was done in early 2019.
That's a Trump.
Yeah, under the Trump administration. That was done in February 2019. All of 2019, the Trump administration did nothing to set that up, to prepare us to leave. Now, Mr. Biden and his team got to take a lot of blame for the way that happened, but so does Mr. Trump. In my opinion, Trump takes a lot more blame than Biden on this, how this was done. That's a good example of how you don't leave your allies out. We did the same thing in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Same thing in
Paris
Vietnam.
Peace Accord
Right.
presented to two Mississippi.
Let's take
This gentleman
both
here,
of their
yeah.
safety.
Hey, David, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
It's good to see that he hasn't changed over.
Well, thanks, David.
Thank you, Senator Hagel. Ashraf Nubani, I'm with On Point Law, sole practitioner and the principal attorney And I want to commend you on the opening remarks. I think it demonstrates sobriety, hope, and also when it comes to your worldview, a work in progress. I'm currently doing a master's in Islamic religious leadership and actually just wrote a book recently called Islam's Challenge for America, and it touches on some of these issues. So basically my question relates to an event. I was at a Ron Paul event a couple of years ago, and General McMaster was there. And, you know, he had really some good points to say that showed that, hey, there's something wrong. We need to take a different tack on things. But things kind of went south when he labeled one of the US's greatest enemies as Turkey. And he gave his reasons. And I later spoke to him afterwards, and it got kind of cut short. But he did, you know, there was an undercurrent of the issue of Israel. So my question to you, and you may have answered this when the sound went bad, he said it's the Russians. So who do you view as the greatest foreign enemy to the United States? Who or what and why?
Well, first of all, I've always taken the approach that we should approach other countries based on not first that they're our enemy, that they're our adversary. We have adversaries in the world. We have competitors in the world. China. Is China an enemy of the United States or a competitor of the United States? China cheats. They steal secrets. They do all the things they shouldn't do. By the way, they do a lot of things that we do too. I think it's smart not to label China as an enemy. Russia has defined itself as an enemy. I mean, Putin has said that the United States, specifically in the West, are enemies. And they're trying to do all these things to us. And so Putin has put us in a position where he's defined the relationship. That wasn't the relationship that any president ever talked about with Russia as an enemy before he invaded Ukraine, before he did what he did in Ukraine. And then it got worse and worse and worse, and of course we supplied weapons and so on. So that's on Putin. Iran. I don't think Iran, the people of Iran, are enemies of the United States. The people of Iran. I think the Ayatollah and that crowd, that corrupt crowd that runs Iran since 1972, are enemies. I think they're brutal enemies. But I don't think the people. So I think you've always got to be careful. Is it the government or the people? You know, when I was criticized and got the hell beat out of me on it, I was anti-Semitic, which is complete folly, complete nonsense. Going into my confirmation hearing, they were full-page ads running in the New York Times that I was anti-Semitic. And my God. And I said, as a United States Senator, I criticize our government, or I question our government all the time. So to question Netanyahu or the Israeli government or to criticize them is not anti-Semitic. I mean, that's nuts. Or criticize any other government, which I do, or question them, which I do ours. In a way, to me, that's the same thing in many ways. When you start questioning the government, I question Bolsonaro, the head of Brazil, president. his government, what he's doing. Obviously Venezuela. But that didn't include the people of Venezuela. So I think you got to be careful about that. And that's how I view it.
Munjid Awadi, I'm the executive director of the Libyan American Alliance. I also work on Tunisia. So the question is with relations to Libya and Tunisia. What seems to be maybe two different approaches that the U.S. took vis-a-vis Libya, kind of especially after the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, hands off and let others in the region take initiative. And we saw the disaster that happened. We even allowed some of our allies, like the UAE, pay for mercenaries, Russian mercenaries, to beat President Libya, commit all kinds. At the same time, we saw that the relationship between the military and the Tunisian military improved dramatically after the fall of Ben Ali. Very close relationship, and then became probably the number one supporter of the Tunisian military, the U.S. And this was probably under your watch as well. Yet we just saw recently how a president who has no real history or legitimacy, especially historic legitimacy in Tunisia, used the Tunisian military to the parliament, take over control, basically stage a coup. And this reflects really, really bad on that close relationship. So how do you look at these two, what seem to be different approaches, yet both of them fail?
Well, on Libya, I think it was a huge mistake. We made a huge mistake doing what we did. And President Obama has said that. He's acknowledged that there was a mistake. Terrible mistake. Stupid. Tunisia is totally different, as you suggest. And I've been to Tunisia times. You can work with the Tunisians or any other country, as we do, with our military, other places. But it's the Tunisian people. And you can try and influence what they do, what they say, but you can't control it. So what happened in Tunisia, that was their decision. I mean, the United States, again, I don't know the depth, I don't know the specifics, what happened or what was attempted to be dissuaded, don't do this or whatever. I don't know anything about that. But what I do know is that when we're in there working with other countries, military to military, like you say, and other relationships, I mean, it's their country, and you're limited as to how much influence that you've got. Now, there are cases, or clear cases in history, in how we didn't always adhere to that. I mean, like Chile and other places, where I think we've tried to get better.
Iran earlier.
That's right. And so we've taken an approach that's not hands off, but it's your country. We don't want to be part of a revolution, of encouraging revolution or being part of any revolution. So.
Listen, I think this has been extraordinarily informative, Senator Hagel. We're all grateful for your remarks. There's something that's far more astute than what we read in the front pages of the New York Times and Washington Post. It's been a real delight to have you here this afternoon. And thank the audience for your patience and questions.
Great question.
Thank you, Bruce, for your great job, and thank you, Mr. Hagel. And hope to have you here again in the future.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Nice to see you all too. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.